And Muslim women's rights advocate Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She is about to speak here at the National Press Club regarding her latest book, Nomad. It details her journey from Holland to the United States and her reconciliation with her family after denouncing the Islam religion. This is live coverage on C-SPAN as the guest is being introduced.
He later escaped from prison and fled into exile. When Ms. Hirsi Ali was eight, her mother took her and her siblings to Saudi Arabia to live with her father. The following year, the family was expelled from that country and moved to Ethiopia, where her father's opposition group was headquarters. After 18 months there, they moved again, this time to Kenya. In 1992, Ms. Hirsi Ali stunned her family by fleeing to the Netherlands to escape an unwanted arranged marriage. She earned an MA degree from the Netherlands Leiden University and served in the Dutch Parliament from 2003 to 2006. In Parliament, she worked on furthering the integration of non-Western immigrants into Dutch society and defending the rights of women in Dutch Muslim society. In 2004, together with director Theo van Gogh, Ms. Hirsi Ali wrote and produced the now famous film, Submission, about the oppression of women in conservative Islamic cultures. The airing of the film on Dutch television resulted in the assassination of Mr. van Gogh by an Islamic extremist and a letter threatening Ms. Hirsi Ali's life. In 2006, Ms. Hirsi Ali moved yet again, this time to the United States, where she is now a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. Her work involves researching the relationship between the West and Islam, women's rights in Islam, violence against women propagated by religious and cultural arguments, and Islam in Europe. In 2007, she and her supporters found the AHA Foundation to help protect and defend the rights of women in the West against militant Islam. Through education, outreach, and the dissemination of knowledge, the foundation seeks to combat crimes against women such as female genital mutilation, forced marriages, honor violence, and honor killings, such as was portrayed in the chilling film, The Stoning of Soraya, previewed by a standing room audience at a National Press Club screening last year. Ms. Hirsi Ali's appearance today comes 4 months after publication of her latest book, titled Nomad, From Islam to America, A Personal Journey Through the Clash of Civilizations. The book is the second volume of her autobiography. The first volume, Infidel, chronicled her life up to her departure for America. Her earlier book was The Caged Virgin. She was named one of Time magazine's 100 Influential People of 2005 and has received numerous human rights awards. Today marks Ms. Hirsi Ali's second appearance at the National Press Club podium. The topic she has chosen for this afternoon is Islam a religion of tolerance? Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm National Press Club welcome for Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Ms. Doris Margolis, Mr. Keith Hill, thank you very much for having me here at the National Press Club for the second time. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. My dear friends, Chris Demuth, the man who brought me to the United States of America, and Christina Summers, my dear friend from the American Enterprise Institute who also works on feminism, my security coordinator, Amanda, my assistant, thank you for coming with me. Ladies and gentlemen, today's topic is the statement we often hear: Islam is a religion of tolerance. You hear it in different ways. Islam is a religion of peace. Is it a religion of tolerance? It helps to define the terms of the statement first. Tolerance, in English, as I understand it, is an attitude. It is an attitude, the disposition to allow freedom of choice and behavior. But an attitude is also different from behavior. It's also an act. Not to believe that one should allow it, but to actually do it. For instance, if you're opposed to smoking, you may think of yourself to be tolerant of smokers. But it's different if you allow a smoker in your house to smoke or light a cigarette for him. There's that level where there's a difference between attitudes and behavior. Religious tolerance has a long philosophical history, which I'm not going to enter into, but in general terms, it has come to be understood as the willingness to recognize and respect the beliefs and practices of others. That willingness in a liberal democracy is not absolute. It has its limits. When I lived in the Netherlands, I remember that the legislators used to try and find a trade-off between very orthodox Protestant Christians who did not want to vaccinate their children using religious arguments and the right of the child to be vaccinated against such horrible diseases as polio. Fortunately, in that setting, the legislators chose to protect the interest of the child. That's just to give you an idea. The term religion is commonly understood also as the quest for a higher being. It has three aspects. It's a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe attributed to a superhuman agency. A second aspect is such rituals that pertain to deaths, births, food, clothing, etc. And its third aspect, and I think in the topic of today, much more important aspect, is the moral framework that governs the conduct of human affairs, as is derived from that superhuman agency and the morality attributed to being the source of that superhuman agency. Islam is an all-encompassing moral, legal, political, social, and cultural framework. It's both a system of belief and a system of practice. And the word means submission. It is submission to the will of Allah. It's very important to distinguish the Muslim, the one who confesses to adhere to the belief system, from the belief system Islam. It's important to make that distinction because belief systems do not act. Human beings think and act. And human beings can also change their minds. Human beings invent belief systems. Belief systems do not invent human beings. There are a list of arguments, and there are very many, I'm not going to exhaust them, that are used to defend the assertion that Islam is a religion of tolerance in our day, a religion of peace. For instance, from scripture, we now know the famous assertion, the famous verse, "Unto thee thine faith, and unto me my faith." That is a statement in the Quran. It is revealed to Muhammad, and the context was when the polytheists of Mecca tried to convince him and sometimes to force him to give up his concept of one God and go back to the concept of many gods. The assertion that Islam is a religion of peace is also defended in the historical context that compares Islamic history to Christian history. We are told that Christians and Jews, when they lived under Islamic domination, were given a protected status. That status was people of the book, and that meant that they didn't have the same rights as Muslims, but they could believe, they could continue to worship their gods and live peacefully. And if you compare that to the experience of Jews and Protestants under Catholic rule in that same period, we are told that Jews were persecuted, massacred, often killed. The same happened to Protestants. Historians also compare and come up with when Christianity, especially Catholicism, was dominant, and they compare it to when Islam was dominant, and they say the intolerance that Catholics, for instance, had toward thinkers and innovators, if you compare it to Islamic dominance, that was very different in the Muslim world at that time. Mathematicians, scientists, astronomers, poets could thrive. That was at a time when the Catholic Church was burning thinkers, was hanging them, and was frustrating their work. Women. The status of women under Catholic rule a long time ago, probably not so long ago, and maybe even under Protestant rule where the prominent Protestants were dominant, you will find some historical material that shows some women were regarded as witches. They were burned, they were hanged, they were denied or drowned, they were denied all kinds of basic rights that men enjoy. And some Muslim historians will say that Islam at that time was actually much friendlier to women. Muhammad was, when he came on the scene and became a ruler, he stopped the practice of burying young girls who were considered to be superfluous. You were superfluous to a family pre-Islam if you were the third daughter or the fourth daughter. Before we get into arguments of for and against, and before we examine whether those assertions that I just made are historically accurate or not, I would like, first of all, to say a few words about what is absolutely not disputed. Not disputed among Muslims, not disputed among Western experts who study Islam. It's not disputed that Islamic jurisprudence is derived from four sources: the Quran, the Holy Book or the Revelation to Muhammad, the Hadith, the acts, the thoughts, and deeds of Muhammad as recorded. And in those recordings, there are 6 compilations that are not considered controversial. The term qiyas, an Arabic term meaning reasoning through analogy, matters that are not explicit in the Quran and explicit not in the Hadith, and that reasoning by analogy is done by experts, ulamas, or scholars. And ijma' is another term, fourth, and that is consensus, but it is a consensus among the learned ones. And again, that consensus or agreement among the learned ones has to do only with what is not explicit in the Quran and in the Hadith. Sharia, or Islamic law, is derived from these 4 sources of Islamic jurisprudence. Al-Qaeda, the 57 member states of the Organization of Islamic Conference, and the entire 1.57 billion Muslims believe in the legitimacy of all 4 sources of this jurisprudence. Now, to believe is not the same as to know. To believe is also not the same as to act on those beliefs. And again, that is why it's very important that we maintain that conceptual difference between Islam on the one hand as a set of beliefs, and the Muslim on the other hand as the individual human being who may or may not adhere to those beliefs. In order to determine whether Islam is tolerant or not, I urge you first to examine those sources of Islamic jurisprudence. Read them for yourself. Don't depend on other experts to translate them for you. Don't depend on believers to tell you what's in them. You are a literate and a privileged group, and most of these things, in fact, all of these things are translated into English. So I urge you to read them and make up your mind what you find in there, whether it's all tolerant or not. I also urge you to examine the history of Islam. Islam as a government system and as a governing system, from its founding up to today, and the actions of believers today. I have done that. And in the 4 sources of Islamic jurisprudence, I found explicit commands to conquer, guidelines on how to go about that, details of how Muhammad defeated his enemies. He headed over 60 military campaigns, and they were very successful. And I don't think he got where he got by offering his enemies candy.